The Widow Who Defied Society and Summoned the Slave After Sunset. On a quiet evening in the spring of 1858, the widow stood by her window and did something no woman of her standing had ever dared to do. She sent a servant boy running across the dark fields with a whispered message. "Tell him to come after sunset," she said, her voice shaking. The man she summoned was not a neighbor, not a friend, not even someone society would allow her to speak to alone. He was the youngest slave on her late husband's plantation. And before that night was over, both their lives would change forever. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The year was 1858, and the small cotton plantation sat just outside a quiet southern town. The war had not yet begun, but tension already lived in the air like summer heat before a storm. The mistress of the house was widow Eleanor Whitmore. She was only 28 when her husband, Master Henry Whitmore, passed away from a sudden fever. Since then, she wore black dresses and kept her hair tied back, as if color itself had left her life. The townspeople watched her closely. A young widow with land and slaves was always a subject of gossip. Among the slaves was Samuel, a young black man no older than 23. He was strong, quiet, and known for his steady hands in the fields. Unlike many others, he could read a little, a secret taught to him by someone long ago. Eleanor had noticed him before, though she never spoke more than a few careful words. But something about his calm eyes unsettled her heart. And on that evening, when she sent for him after sunset, she knew she was stepping onto a path from which there would be no easy return. That night, when the sky turned deep blue and the crickets began their song, Samuel walked slowly toward the big house. He had received the message with confusion. The widow had never called for him alone before. Not after sunset. Not like this. He stopped near the back steps, removing his hat, unsure if he should knock or wait. Before he could decide, the door opened softly. Eleanor stood there, holding a small lantern. Its warm light touched her pale face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Come inside," she said quietly. "No one must see you." Samuel stepped into the kitchen. His heart beat fast. "Yes, ma'am." She set the lantern on the table. "You can speak freely here," she said, almost in a whisper. "I asked for you because I need help." He looked up, surprised. A mistress asking him for help? That was not something he expected. "My husband handled the accounts," she continued. "The books, the letters, the trade papers. I found out you can read. Is that true?" Samuel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "A little, ma'am." Relief passed across her face. "Then I need you to help me understand them. I cannot let the town know I don't understand my own business." That was how it began. Simple, practical, safe. Over the next few weeks, she called him after sunset more than once. They would sit across from each other at the long wooden table. He would read numbers and letters softly. She would listen carefully, asking questions. At first, their conversations stayed proper and distant. But one night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Eleanor asked, "Samuel, do you ever wish for a different life?" The question surprised him. No mistress had ever asked him what he wished for. He looked down at his hands. "Every day," he answered honestly. She held his gaze a second longer than she should have. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Inside, something even more dangerous was beginning to grow between them. The summer air grew thick as weeks passed, and the secret meetings after sunset became a quiet routine. At first, it was only about the account books, cotton prices, debts, letters from traders in nearby towns. But slowly, the words on the page mattered less than the silence between them. One evening, the oil lamp burned low, casting long shadows across the kitchen walls. Samuel finished reading a letter and gently folded it. "That is the last of them," he said. Eleanor did not answer right away. She was not looking at the papers. She was looking at him. "You speak clearly," she said softly. "Better than most men in town." He shifted uncomfortably. "I only read what's written, ma'am." "You are more than what's written," she replied before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air, heavy and bold. Samuel stood slowly. "It's late. I should go." But she stepped closer, her black dress brushing against the wooden floor. "Do you ever feel," she asked, her voice trembling, "that the world we live in is wrong?" He met her eyes fully now. In that moment, they were not mistress and slave. They were simply two lonely souls standing in a quiet room. "Yes," he said. "Every day." The truth between them was clear. It was not just about books. It was not just about business. Something deeper had grown, something neither of them had planned. Then came the knock. 3 sharp pounds on the front door. Eleanor's face turned pale. No one visited at this hour. The knock came again, louder. Samuel stepped back into the shadows near the kitchen wall. From the front hallway came a familiar voice. "Eleanor, open the door." It was Mr. Thomas Carter, her late husband's cousin, a man who had always believed the plantation should belong to him. Her heart raced. She had refused his offers to help manage the estate many times. She knew he watched her closely, waiting for any mistake. She moved toward the front door, forcing her hands to stay steady. When she opened it, Thomas stood there with a stiff smile. "I saw a light," he said. "Thought I'd check on you." "It's late," she replied calmly. His eyes scanned the hallway. "Are you alone?" The question cut through her. "Yes," she answered firmly. But Thomas stepped inside without invitation. His boots echoed against the floor as he walked further into the house. In the kitchen, Samuel held his breath. There was no back exit without being seen. If Thomas found him here after dark, alone with the widow, the consequences would be severe. For Samuel, it could mean being sold. Or worse. Thomas reached the kitchen doorway. And there he saw him. For a long second, no one moved. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "What is he doing here?" Eleanor stepped forward quickly. "He was reading the account books for me." "At this hour?" Thomas's voice rose. "You call a field slave into your house after dark?" Samuel lowered his gaze, but his fists tightened. Thomas looked from one to the other, suspicion clear in his face. "The town will hear of this. A widow must protect her reputation." Eleanor felt something inside her shift. All her life, she had obeyed rules made by others. First by her father, then by her husband, now by this man who believed he had a right to her land and her choices. "No," she said quietly. Thomas blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no," she repeated, stronger this time. "This is my house, my land, and I decide who enters it." Thomas's face turned red. "You are forgetting your place." "And you are forgetting yours," she replied. Silence filled the room. Even Samuel looked up, shocked by her courage. Thomas took a step closer to Samuel. "You think you're clever, boy? Standing here in the dark?" Samuel finally spoke, his voice steady. "I only did what I was told, sir." But Thomas was not listening. He turned back to Eleanor. "If the town hears of this, they will question your character. They will question your ability to manage this estate. And if they do, I can petition the court to take control." That was the real threat, not just gossip. How? Eleanor felt fear rise inside her. But beneath that fear was something stronger. She looked at Samuel. For weeks, she had hidden behind careful words. Tonight, there was no hiding left. "Samuel," she said softly, never breaking eye contact with Thomas, "you may go." Samuel hesitated, unsure if leaving would make things worse. "It's an order," she added gently. He walked past Thomas without a word and disappeared into the night. Thomas turned back to her. "You are playing a dangerous game." "Perhaps," she answered. "But it is my game to play." He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a cold smile. "We shall see how long you remain so confident." When he finally left, the house felt too quiet. Eleanor leaned against the wall, her breathing unsteady. She had defied him. She had chosen her own voice. But she knew this was only the beginning. By morning, the whispers would start, and Samuel's safety and her future would hang by a fragile thread. By sunrise, the plantation no longer felt peaceful. Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, watching the first light stretch across the fields. Normally, mornings brought routine, workers lining up, overseers calling out tasks, the steady rhythm of another day beginning. But this morning felt different. She knew Thomas Carter would not stay silent. And he did not. By noon, two ladies from town arrived without invitation. They carried polite smiles and sharp eyes. They spoke softly about concern and reputation. They hinted that a young widow should be careful with appearances, that certain lines must never be crossed. Eleanor answered with calm words, but inside, she felt the walls closing in. Across the fields, Samuel sensed it too. The overseer watched him more closely than before. Work was assigned to him far from the main house. Two men whispered when he passed. He understood enough to know his name had been spoken in town. That evening, as the sun dropped low, Samuel did not expect to be called again. But the message came. After sunset, the servant boy said quietly. Samuel hesitated longer this time. He knew the risk had doubled. Yet something stronger than fear pushed him forward. When he entered the kitchen, Eleanor was not seated at the table. She stood near the fireplace, her face pale but determined. They are trying to take the estate, she said without greeting. Thomas plans to petition the court. He says I cannot manage alone. Samuel's jaw tightened. Because of me. Because I refuse to bow to him, she corrected gently. Then her voice softened. But you are part of it now. Silence filled the room. This was no longer about secret reading lessons. This was about survival. If he wins, Samuel said carefully, what happens? Eleanor looked at him with honesty that held no comfort. He would control everything. The land, the house, the people. The people. Samuel understood what that meant. New ownership, new rules, possibly being sold away. The thought tightened his chest. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice. There is something you don't know. She opened a small wooden box from the table. Inside lay official papers, documents sealed with ink and wax. My husband signed these before he died, she explained. He believed slavery would not last forever. Quietly, without telling anyone, he began arranging legal transfers for some of the younger men. Samuel stared at her. Your name is on one of them, she said softly. The world seemed to stop. Free? He whispered. Not yet, she replied. The papers must be filed properly, and Thomas must never see them. If he takes control before I act, he will destroy them. Hope rose inside Samuel, fragile and bright. But hope could also be dangerous. You would risk everything? He asked. Eleanor held his gaze. I already have. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. A storm was forming again, just like the night Thomas had arrived. Footsteps suddenly echoed on the porch. Both of them froze. A firm knock struck the door. This time, it was not Thomas. It was the sheriff. Eleanor's heart pounded. She hid the papers quickly, sliding the box beneath the floorboard near the hearth. Samuel moved toward the back entrance, but before he could reach it, the sheriff's voice called out. Widow Whitmore, open the door. We need to speak. Eleanor straightened her shoulders and walked to the front. When she opened it, the sheriff removed his hat politely. Behind him stood Thomas Carter, silent and watching. We've received a complaint, the sheriff said. Questions about the conduct inside this house. We must ensure everything is proper. Thomas's eyes flicked past Eleanor, searching the shadows. Samuel stood still in the kitchen, hidden just out of sight. He could hear every word. Eleanor did not tremble this time. You are welcome to inspect my books, she said evenly. My accounts are in order. That may be, Thomas added smoothly, but we are also concerned about inappropriate associations. The insult hung heavy. Eleanor's voice grew firm. There is nothing improper here. The sheriff stepped forward slightly. Then you will not object to us looking around? A single wrong move could expose Samuel. The papers. Everything. For one long second, Eleanor considered telling the truth, all of it. The secret documents. The promise of freedom. Her feelings. But she knew the world they lived in. Very well, she said. The men entered. Samuel's pulse thundered in his ears as Boots approached the kitchen doorway. This was the moment. The edge of everything. And as lightning flashed outside, lighting the room in white for just an instant, Thomas Carter's eyes locked onto Samuel standing there in the shadows. A slow smile crossed Thomas's face. Just as I suspected, he said. The storm had arrived. The lightning faded, but the tension in the kitchen did not. Thomas stepped fully into the room, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. So, he said calmly, you are still here after dark. Samuel stood straight. He did not lower his head this time. The sheriff looked from Samuel to Eleanor. Ma'am, he said carefully, this is not proper. Eleanor felt fear move through her, but she did not step back. She had already crossed the line that society drew around her. There was no point pretending now. He is here because I asked him to be, she said clearly. Thomas gave a soft laugh. A widow alone at night with a young slave? The town will not accept that answer. The town does not own me, she replied. Thomas turned to the sheriff. You see, she cannot manage this estate with sound judgment. I will file the petition tomorrow. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Unless there is proof of mismanagement, I cannot remove her authority. Thomas's smile faded. Then perhaps we should speak of the hidden documents. Eleanor's heart stopped for a second. Hidden documents. He did not know where they were, but he suspected something. Thomas walked closer to the fireplace. Your late husband was not a foolish man. I have reason to believe he made changes before his death. Silence. Samuel understood. If those papers were found, they would be destroyed. His name, his chance at freedom, would vanish like smoke. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. Samuel stepped forward. There are papers, he said calmly. Eleanor turned to him, shocked. Samuel. He met her eyes gently. There was no anger there, only courage. They are legal, he continued. Signed properly. Why this? They grant future freedom. Not just to me, to others. Thomas's face darkened. You dare speak. I speak truth, Samuel said firmly. Master Henry believed the world was changing. He wanted to be on the right side of that change. The sheriff frowned. If such documents exist, they must be reviewed properly. Thomas quickly added, or destroyed if fraudulent. Eleanor stepped forward now. They are not fraudulent. She walked slowly to the hearth. For a brief second, her hand trembled. This was the final step. Once revealed, there would be no turning back. She knelt, lifted the loose floorboard, and removed the wooden box. The room was so quiet that even the rain seemed to pause. She handed the box directly to the sheriff. Read them, she said. Thomas tried to interrupt, but the sheriff held up a hand. He opened the papers carefully, scanning the signatures, the dates, the official stamps. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the sheriff looked up. These are valid, he said. Filed drafts, ready for submission. If processed, they will be legally binding. Thomas's jaw tightened. Then they must not be processed. They will be, Eleanor replied. The sheriff nodded slowly. If the widow wishes to file them, she has every right. Thomas realized, in that moment, that his plan was collapsing. If the documents became official, he would not only lose his claim to control the estate, he would also lose authority over several valuable workers. You are ruining yourself, he said quietly to Eleanor. She met his gaze with calm strength. No, I am choosing myself. Thomas left without another word. The sheriff gathered the documents. I will deliver these for formal filing in the morning. When the door finally closed and the storm softened to a gentle rain, only Eleanor and Samuel remained in the quiet kitchen. For a long time, they did not speak. You should not have stepped forward, she said softly. He gave a small smile. Neither should you. The weight between them was no longer fear. It was something clearer. Freedom was now within reach. But freedom also meant change. And change meant their paths might not remain the same. Eleanor looked at him, not as mistress and slave, not as widow and worker, but simply as Samuel. What will you do, she asked gently, when you are free? He thought about it for a long moment. Stay, he said finally, if you will have me. The rain outside turned softer, almost peaceful. For the first time since her husband's death, Eleanor felt something like hope rise in her chest. Not secret, not hidden, but honest. By the end of that summer, the papers were officially filed at the county courthouse. The law could not be undone so easily once ink had dried and seals had been pressed. Samuel and 3 other young men were granted their freedom. The town did not celebrate. Whispers followed Eleanor when she walked through the market. Some doors closed more quickly than before. Invitations grew fewer. But she held her head high. For the first time in her life, she was not living by someone else's rules. Samuel did not leave. He chose to stay on the land, not as property, but as a paid worker. The fields slowly changed under his care. New crops were planted. Old debts were cleared. The plantation became smaller, simpler, and quieter. People talked, of course. They always do. But over time, gossip grows tired. What remained was truth. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, 2 figures could often be seen walking side by side along the edge of the fields. Not mistress and slave. Not widow and servant. Just Eleanor and Samuel. Their story was not perfect. It was not easy. But it was theirs. And sometimes, the bravest kind of love is not loud or wild. It is simply the choice to stand together when the world tells you to stand apart.